Introduction to the Immortal, Book 1, by J J Dewey. Joseph J. Dewey has been a student of philosophy, metaphysics, and religion most of his life, and has taught numerous classes and seminars on a variety of avant-garde subjects. In his book, The Immortal, the author draws from many true life experiences to create a novel that presents unique and mystical teachings in a way that captivates the imagination. What is true and what is fiction? That is for the reader to determine. Since 1998, when this book was first published, Mr. Dewey has taught one of the most active discussion groups on the Internet called The Keys of Knowledge. He has published several thousand articles on the web and has written numerous books. Each year, readers from around the world gather for a 3-day symposium to hear Mr. Dewey teach them in person. These are currently available on CDs in MP3 format. The author currently lives in Boise, Idaho with his wife, who was the inspiration for the main female character in the book. Copyright 1997 and 2006 by Joseph J. Dewey. All rights reserved, including the right to reproduce this book or portions thereof in any form whatsoever, with the following exception for Book 1. The author gives permission to readers to duplicate and circulate Book 1 of this series in printed, digital, or audio form, as long as the material therein is credited to the authorship of J J Dewey and the copied writings are circulated without charge. Books 2, 3, 4, and beyond require written permission for any duplication or use. Forward. Peter, seeing him, John, saith to Jesus, Lord, and what shall this man do? Jesus saith to him, If I will that he tarry till I come, what is that to thee? Follow thou me. Then went this saying abroad among the brethren, that disciple should not die. Yet Jesus said not unto him, He shall not die. But if I will that he tarry till I come, what is that to thee? John 21:21 through 23. John the Beloved, the Revelator, an apostle of Jesus, perhaps the most mysterious man in history, comes alive in this book. Legend has it that John never died and still roams the earth as a teacher. The contents of this first book and the additional series of books about the Immortal may or may not be true. It is up to the reader to decide. But whatever the opinion rendered, the story and teachings herein are worthy of serious consideration.
The Immortal, Book 1, by J J Dewey, read by the author. Chapter 1, Elizabeth. I've always wanted to be a writer, but never seemed to find the time to carry out my dream. Ironically, this time in my life is the most difficult of all to begin such a project as this, but it is something I must do. I have a story to tell that is difficult to believe, so I am writing it as fiction. It is too unbelievable to present as a true story. Nevertheless, I do maintain that the principles taught herein are true, and that many readers will have this verified by their hearts and souls. I'd like to start with John, but that probably wouldn't work. I must tell you about Elizabeth and something about myself before you can begin to understand. There's not a lot to tell about me. I am average or below average in a number of ways. If there's anything out of the ordinary about me, it's probably the fact that I am quite curious in nature. I have thought quite a bit about why things are the way they are. I've always asked myself a lot of unanswerable questions, like, who or what is God? Is there life after death? What will it be like? What is the purpose of life? Questions that seem to have no answers. I met Elizabeth about 10 years ago. I was about 43 years old, and Elizabeth was several years younger. I was just getting my feet wet in real estate after failing in several business ventures. Both Elizabeth and I had been married previously, but since we got along great together after experiencing difficult relationships with others, we both felt like we had finally mastered the art of marriage to the extent that we half-heartedly considered giving seminars on the subject. Leaving my children with my previous wife was one of the most difficult decisions of my life, but the situation was not one of those win-win possibilities. It was lose-lose. The fact that I lost so much in my relationship with my children, and they lost in their relationship with me, made it all the more important to me that my relationship with Elizabeth would somehow be worth the great sacrifice. Let's move on here. I know a lot of you have gone through difficult marriages and wish you could have had your life with your children to live over again, but there is something else here that I also know. I know that all of you have the desire within your hearts to meet the love of your life and fall in love and stay in love. I know that few of you have found the quality of love you are looking for. Well, this is one area where my life was not exactly average. I found the love of my life. I found even more than I was looking for. I found Elizabeth. After my divorce, I started teaching several classes in the local community adult education programs. It had long been a hobby of mine to study graphology, or how character is revealed through handwriting. Then after years of dabbling, I became pretty good at it, so I volunteered my services. I thank God every day that I studied handwriting analysis, because without it, I may not have recognized Elizabeth. At the end of my first class, I had everyone in the class hand in samples of his or her handwriting. Then I proceeded to demonstrate that I was truly accurate by analyzing each one of them. Now, this has nothing to do with psychic powers. Instead, it's an analytical way to discern character. There were about 20 in the class, and I thought I had analyzed everyone when Elizabeth stood up. "You haven't analyzed me yet," she said. "I'm sorry," I said. "Did you hand in a sample?" "Yes, I did." I picked up the pile of samples and handed them to her and said, "See if yours is one of these." She looked through them. "Here it is," she said, handing it to me. It seemed to have been stuck to another sample. I looked at the handwriting. I did a double take. Through the years, I had not only formulated an image of what I was looking for in an ideal mate, but I had also formulated what my ideal mate's handwriting should look like. After many years and thousands of handwriting samples, I finally found one that looked like the image I had conjectured. I probably embarrassed Elizabeth when I blurted out her qualities. Her handwriting showed that she was very intelligent, passionate, objective, yet caring, focused, curious, loving, yet having good common sense. After telling her about a dozen positive characteristics, I put the sample down and took a good look at her. The first thing I noticed was her very attractive, almost sparkling face, with darting, intelligent eyes that seemed to focus with great attention from time to time. There was an honesty in her eyes that revealed her mood at the moment. I have since come to call them smiling eyes, because when she is happy, the sparkle in her eyes makes her feeling so obvious. Physically, she was about 5'3", light brown hair, great figure, and with looks enough to generate an attractive pull in any male. I somehow felt deep inside myself that I would marry her. I tried to momentarily dismiss the feeling, but it stayed with me throughout the week. Then after the next class, I accosted her and asked her to join me for coffee, and the rest is history. I could easily write a book about our relationship and how it developed, but that is not the grand purpose of this book, as you will soon see. What you need to understand at this time is that we fell as much in love as is possible for us mortals to do. Think of your favorite love story and multiply the emotions times 10, and that was us. I felt fulfilled, secure for the first time in my life. It seemed that nothing could go wrong until that fateful day. I remember the day very clearly. I was in the family room reading a book, and Elizabeth was fixing us an evening cup of coffee. The moment came as she was walking down the stairs, bringing my cup to me just as she did each evening. But this time she fell down the stairs, knocking herself into a semi-conscious state. I ran to her, holding her as she revived, and lifting her up. "I can't stand up," she said. "Sure you can, sweetheart. You just had a bad fall. Just rest a minute." She rested a while, but still she could not stand. I rushed her to the emergency room. The doctor told me they needed to run some tests. Finally, after 3 weeks of testing, we discovered the problem. She had multiple sclerosis. My heart sunk as I asked the doctor how serious it was and how long she had to live. "It varies with each person," he said. "Some go quickly, others hang on for years. I must warn you, however, it appears that the disease is progressing quickly with your wife. I would guess that she has somewhere around a year or 2 to live. You never know, though. She could linger on for 10 years or more, but you must prepare yourself for the worst. Right now she can't even walk. She may get some of her strength back, but then will probably lose it again. It's like moving 1 step forward and 2 steps back. Sooner or later the disease gets you. The problem now is with her legs, but sooner or later will be other parts of her body. Near the end she'll probably lose her sight and even her ability to speak and feed herself. I hope you love her a lot, because she's going to be very dependent on you." "I'll be there for her," I said with tears in my eyes. "We'll do whatever it takes. Somehow we'll beat it." Just be prepared to deal with it. Don't get your hopes too high, he said. It can be frustrating for both of you. Just be thankful that you have a year or two of sharing left. Many people I deal with have their loved ones taken suddenly and wish they could just have 5 minutes with them to say goodbye. You have time for a long, loving goodbye. I would advise you to make the most of it. I appreciate the advice, Doctor, but don't take our hope away. There has to be a way to beat this. I understand your feelings, he said patiently, but my experience tells me I must do what I can to prepare you for the real world. I see your point, I said, but I refuse to give up hope no matter what the odds are. I've always believed that all things are possible. I'm here to help however I can, the doctor said quietly. The next year was rather discouraging. The doctor was proven to be entirely correct. Elizabeth got 1 step better and 2 steps worse. She got some strength back in her legs, but later lost all the strength in her legs plus some of her vision. During that year we tried every medicine, every health food, every herb that had a chance of working, but her health seemed unrelated to anything that we tried. She finally reached a point where she was confined to a wheelchair and was barely able to feed herself because of her shaking hands. Fortunately, she still had her mental capacities, but the doctor warned me that even that could go next. At this point, he told me that she seemed to be deteriorating and could go fairly quickly. She could go in 6 months or possibly linger on for years. One night as we lay in bed together, I held her in my arms. I thought of the years we spent together. In my mind's eye, I visualized her being vibrant as she was when we first met, and as she is now. I felt very sad. Why did this have to happen to the most wonderful woman I've ever met? As I contemplated the situation, I said a prayer from deep within my heart. Why, God, does something like this happen to such a wonderful person as my wife? You would think you'd have to be a serial killer to deserve such punishment. But Elizabeth has never hurt anyone. Maybe some minor things, but nothing to deserve such pain. If this is punishment, it seems unjust and out of proportion. Even ministers these days are saying life is unfair. If you are truly God, then one of your main attributes should be fairness and justice. Where is fairness and justice in this situation? I ask not for myself, but for the woman I love. Surely there is an answer somewhere, somehow, someplace. This was sort of a basic prayer I thought within my heart several times daily ever since Elizabeth became ill. However, on this particular night I said it with great emotion and cried myself to sleep with these thoughts. That night I fell into a very sound, profound, yet peaceful sleep. Then in the morning something quite unusual happened. I was at that point where you're between being asleep and awake. I know there have been several times, when I've been at this stage, that I was not sure if I was dreaming or not. This was one of those times. This was the first time I heard bells. Gentle, penetrating, familiar, soft, yet very real bells. At the time I heard them, I was sure I was hearing real bells, perhaps ringing somewhere outside my bedroom window. But then I roused myself and rose up in my bed, and the sound disappeared. I was not sure if I really heard them or if I was dreaming. Then I settled back into sleep, and I heard the bells again. I roused myself, and the sound again went silent. Then this process was repeated for a 3rd time. One experience like this I could have shrugged off, but a 3-time repetition got me thinking there was some significance here. Then the next morning I heard the bells again, and again the next morning. Finally I felt I had to mention it to Elizabeth. I told her the story, and she said, "The only thing I can suggest is it must be some type of message or sign intended just for you. I was sleeping next to you each of those 3 mornings, and I heard no bells. But if it is some type of message intended just for me, what good is it? I thought and thought about it, and I can't see any hidden meaning in the bells ringing." "Have you heard bells in real life sound anything like these?" she asked. "Well, they sound something like Christmas bells. They seem very familiar. Christmas is just a few weeks away. Could that have something to do with it?" "Who knows?" she shrugged. "Maybe you're just thinking too much about Christmas. How about taking your mind off the bells by doing some grocery shopping for me? Get a pen and I'll give you a list." Chapter 2. The Mystery of the Bells. Since Elizabeth became ill, I did most of our shopping and must admit I got pretty good at it. I clipped coupons, checked for sales, compared store brands with national brands, and much more. I got to the point where I somewhat enjoyed shopping and would probably still do most of it even if Elizabeth was healed. As I drove up to Albertsons Supermarket at 16th and State Streets in our fair city of Boise, Idaho, I noticed for the first time that Christmas decorations were up and Christmas trees were for sale. I wasn't sure if decorations were just put up or if this was the first time I had noticed. It seemed like Thanksgiving had just ended and it was too early to even think about Christmas. I felt a little like Scrooge as I got out of my car, thinking about all the presents I had to buy compared to how few I would receive. I remember thinking as I entered the building, how it would be a lot better if Christmas came just once every 5 years. Then as I opened the door, all thoughts left me. I heard the bells. They were the same bells I heard in my quasi-sleep, but this time I was sure that I was awake, and the bells were real. I retreated back out the door and turned around. To my surprise, I saw a bell ringer for the Salvation Army. I was amazed that I did not connect the bells I heard in my sleep with those of the bell ringers. Somehow I did not remember them sounding like the bells I heard in front of me. The sound of these bells seemed to be so pure, sweet, and almost holy. Perhaps I had just never listened to them before. The bell ringer was a good-looking, older man around 60, clean-shaven with dark hair and simply dressed. Some of the bell ringers looked like they could have been taken from a homeless shelter. But this one did not give that impression. He was a far cry from any executive look, but also gave the impression he would never be down and out. If I were to guess his vocation by his looks, I would guess that he was a high school teacher, or maybe even a real estate salesman like myself. After looking his direction for about 30 seconds, he caught my eye and said, "Merry Christmas." "Merry Christmas," I said, as I retreated back into the store in a state of bewilderment. As I went through my wife's shopping list, I tried to find meaning in it all. I heard the bells on my awakening 3 days in a row, and now I heard the same bells here at the grocery store by the Salvation Army bell ringer. At the time I heard the bells, I was thinking like Scrooge about Christmas. Maybe I was being taught some supernatural lesson like in the movie. Perhaps I was being told I should donate to the poor. Financially, I was feeling like one of the poor myself, for I had gone heavily into debt and had no extra money because of Elizabeth's illness. Nevertheless, perhaps I was supposed to take my mind off my own concerns and think of others who have problems. By the time I finished shopping, I had decided to give the bell ringer a donation on the way out. It wasn't much, but maybe it's what I was supposed to do. I passed by the pot and dropped in a $5 bill. The bell ringer looked me in the eye and said, "Thanks. Have a Merry Christmas." There was something about the look in his eyes that disturbed me. He seemed to have large eyes with large pupils, and the look about him reinforced the idea of a teacher in my mind. There was something about his look that made me feel that he knew things that I did not. I'd never felt that way about a stranger before, but that is how I felt about this man. I got in the car and started driving home and passed another store that appeared to have a bell ringer. I parked again and walked toward the bells and stopped in front of the man. I was stunned. These bells sounded similar, but not exactly like the first bell ringer or those I heard in my dream state. This piqued my curiosity, so for the next couple hours I drove all over town and visited every bell ringer I could find. Each one of them sounded similar to the second bell ringer. Only the first bell ringer created a sound like the bells that I remember hearing in my sleep. Then I began to wonder if my mind was playing tricks on me. Maybe I just thought those first bells were like the ones in my dream state. Elizabeth was upset that I was gone so long shopping and was worried about me. She quickly calmed down as I explained to her what had happened. I ended with, "Maybe it was just my imagination that the first bell ringer sounded like the ones I heard on waking." "And maybe it isn't," she said. "Maybe it's a sign of some kind. Perhaps you were supposed to remember the spirit of Christmas and give what you can afford, and that's all there is to it." "Maybe," I said, not convinced she was right. I felt unsettled about any explanation we could arrive at about the bells. The next morning, as I lay between wakefulness and sleep, I became even more unsettled as I heard the bells again. This time I heard them resonate for a few seconds after I was fully awake. I knew now that the bells were not from my imagination. I also knew that the message of the bells was not resolved. After I shared this with Elizabeth, she said, "Your guess that you are supposed to have a more giving spirit may be correct. The last time you gave $5. That's probably about all we have given to the poor all year. Think about it. That's not much of a donation. I know we don't have much money, but we can do better than that. You're right, I said. This time I'll give $50. That's about all we can afford, but we can give that much. I took off again to Albertsons at 16th Street and approached the bell ringer again. Again I heard the beautiful sound. They were definitely the same sound I heard on waking. As I started to appreciate their beauty, I felt my whole body and soul resonate to the vibration of the bells. Somehow they made me feel whole, peaceful, strong, and connected. It's difficult to give you the picture, but the effect was definite and strong. I put 2 20s and a 10 in the pot, looked at the bell ringer, and said, "Merry Christmas." "Your gift is greatly appreciated," said the bell ringer. I started walking backward, catching the eye of the bell ringer for a few seconds before we disconnected. Again I felt unsettled as I drove home. After I got home, I told Elizabeth, "Giving the $50 was a good thing to do, but I don't think it was the answer." Suppose that the answer has nothing to do with the bells, Christmas, the spirit of giving, but something else. "What else could it be?" she asked. "Maybe it's got something to do with the man, the bell ringer. You said you felt he was different." "Yes," I said, "he was different. Maybe he knows something." "If you hear the bells again, then maybe you should check him out," she said. Chapter 3. The Bell Ringer. The next morning I heard the bells again. They continued to ring for several minutes after I was fully awake. This time I decided I must talk to the bell ringer himself. I felt there was a possibility he may somehow hold the keys to this mystery. I drove over to Albertsons again, and there he was, faithfully ringing his bell. I felt nervous about approaching him, but forced myself onward. I put a couple dollars in the pot and managed to say, "How's it going today?" "Fine," he replied. "Has anyone commented that the sound of your bells seemed to be different than any other bell ringers in town?" "Several have commented." He smiled with noticeable pleasure in his eyes. "The reason my bell sounds differently is that I have my own bell. I didn't know any bell ringers have their own bell. I've used this bell for a very long time. Here, take a look at it." He put it in my hand. It felt warm, almost tingly to my touch. I peered at it and said, "It looks like there are some ancient hand-carved hieroglyphics on the surface." I looked closer. "This one is interesting. It looks like a crop circle I remember seeing recently. Do you know what they mean?" "The meanings are layered and are interpreted in levels. I understand several of the levels," he said. After he said this, I seemed to sense that my suspicion was correct, that there was something hidden about this man. I rang the bell gently against my ear. "It has the most beautiful sound I've ever heard," I said. "Yes," said the man, smiling. "It really helps with the donations. Just because of that beautiful sound, this location receives over 3 times the donations of any other in town." "Interesting," I said. "Has anyone told you they heard your bells in their sleep?" The man looked visibly shaken. "Not for a long time," he said. "Why do you ask that?" I told him of my experience with the bells. He smiled and said, "Then you are the one I've been waiting for." I stared at him wide-eyed. "You've been waiting for me? Why? This is too weird to be true. If you think this is strange now, just wait a while. What is your name, my old friend?" "What do you mean, my old friend?" "I'll explain later when you are ready. Now tell me your name." I figured, what harm is there in telling him? "My name is J J Dewey. My friends call me Joe." "So the J stands for Joe, or is it Joseph?" "On my birth certificate it is Joseph. But as you know, almost all Josephs call themselves Joe. Joseph seems a little pious. About the only person who ever calls me that is my wife." "It's good that you are not pious. Nevertheless, Joseph is a beautiful and ancient name. Do you know what it means?" "I think I read somewhere it means added or added upon." "Whoever came up with that did not really understand the Hebrew," he said. "In ancient days, when a father named a son Joseph, he did so with the understanding that his son will have great increase, that whatever good that is in him will be amplified and eventually bring forth abundance of all the earth has to offer. Joseph of the Bible, who was sold into Egypt, was the perfect example of this. He increased in knowledge, virtue, and eventually became the richest man on the earth." "Sounds like a good destiny," I said. This man was unusually knowledgeable for a bell ringer. "Your second initial is J. What does that stand for?" "John," I said. How appropriate. That is also my name. Do you know what this name means? I don't think so. This name comes from the Hebrew Yachanan. Any dictionaries that define the word miss the full meaning. Basically, it implies that a man with this name will attract the attention of God to the extent that God will befriend him as an equal. Some say it means favored of God, but the meaning is more like friend of God. So would you say that the Apostle John is a great example of this, since he was called the beloved of Jesus, or perhaps his best friend, I ask? John's eyes widened in surprise, and he smiled. He was an example, perhaps. I don't know if I would call him a great one. I pondered what he said. The comment seemed rather strange to me. Of course John the Beloved was a great example, I thought. He shifted my attention again toward his bell. See the symbol here? He said, holding up the bell. I looked and answered. You mean the two intertwined circles? Yes. One has a dot in the middle, I remarked. That is my name, said John. So this symbol means John? Yes and no, he said. It identifies me, and I am John, but it doesn't necessarily mean John. You seem to speak in riddles, I said. All teachers do at times, he said, smiling. Did I hear right that your last name is Dewey? Yes. Do you know what that name means? I'm not sure. The medieval Welsh altered the name David, or the Greek David, to something like Dawi, and finally to Dewey. Do you know the meaning of David, my old friend? I wondered again why he kept calling me his old friend, but I was too interested in the names to backtrack. It seems like I remember learning back in Sunday school that David means beloved. The standard meaning is close here. It means beloved as in the sense of a family member or close friend. King David of the Bible was called a man after God's own heart, and God had compassion toward David and his weakness, just as a father would toward his own son. How do you know all this? You almost sound like you know this from personal experience. This man was really arousing my curiosity. That doesn't matter right now, he replied. The point is that you are blessed with 3 meaningful ancient names, which will help you accomplish your mission. Mission? I asked, startled. I would have walked away at this point if the man had not been so captivating. Your full name is strong with meaning. Put together it goes something like this. The desires of your heart will be amplified and fulfilled by attracting the attention of God or His servants. If you use your power of increase for good, you will enter into the kingdom of God and become a part of the family of God. It's a good thing I didn't know the meaning of my name earlier. I might have got a big head, I laughed. You are far from being alone in having a beautiful meaning behind your name. Almost all names have a lot of beauty and meaning in them. It is sad that the ancient science of names and the power of their meaning has been lost to the world, but this loss is temporary. Mankind will soon learn the power of names again. I studied this wise man closer. You aren't just a bell ringer, are you? Who are you really? John sighed, looked heavenward for a moment, and then looked at me. I guess it's time to tell someone, but I can only tell you if you heard the bells as you were waking from sleep. You did hear them, didn't you? Yes, I heard them loud and clear. John shut his eyes for a few seconds as if he were reading a page from a book within his head. He opened them and said, Yes, you really did hear them. I do not doubt you. This is a great day. Would you like to get a cup of coffee at Denny's when I finish my shift? It's only a few minutes away. I didn't know if this guy was for real or not. Probably not, I thought. But like I said, I'm a very curious person. I replied, I don't know why I find your words so fascinating. Yes, I would really like to talk some more. Chapter 4. The First Communion. Drinking coffee at Denny's seemed to be a strange situation to have the greatest spiritual experience of my life. But that was where it happened. After we received our coffee and exchanged several pleasantries about the Christmas season, I had to show my curiosity. I'm full of questions. I want to know the meaning of the bells, who you are, and what you mean by mission. One at a time, he smiled. What do you want to know first? Do you know why I heard the bells? The bells were tuned to your vibration, and I was calling for you. The spiritual law is I could not come to you, but you had to respond and come to me. You heard the bells and came to me as I anticipated. That is all I will tell you right now. Well, I'll take any morsel I can get right now. Can you tell me who you are? Obviously, you're more than a bell ringer, and I think more than any ordinary man. If I just tell you outright, you will not believe me, he said. Hold your right hand up and let your fingertips touch mine. I felt kind of weird doing this. I looked around and saw we were fairly secluded in a corner, so I thought, what the heck, and put my fingertips next to his. Now look me steady in the eyes, he said. It seemed a strange thing to do, but everything about this man and the events leading up to our encounter seemed strange. So I thought I had nothing to lose and looked him in the eyes as we touched fingertips. At first nothing seemed to happen. Keep looking, he said, and free your mind from all thoughts. As I cooperated with him, I felt my mind begin to drift. I thought we were having a Vulcan mind melding, for I sensed a merging of our two souls in a way difficult to explain. He pulled away his fingers and asked, Now tell me, who am I? I drew back in a start and exclaimed, I know who you are. You're John. He smiled and said, You've known all along my name is John. But you're not just any John. You are the John. And which John is that? You are John, the fisherman, the son of Zebedee, the apostle, the beloved. How do I know this? I transferred some of my memories to you. Do you believe them? You're right. If you told me outright, I might have thought you were a crackpot. But seeing your memories makes it hard to deny. A part of me believes what I received, but another part says this is impossible. My mind has to make sense of all this. I have to ask a couple more questions. Ask away. 2,000 years have passed since the days of the apostles. This means that either you are an angel sent back to the earth or are a resurrected being. Or perhaps I'm just dreaming all of this. It's none of those things, he said. But what else could it be, I asked. There's one more possibility that you missed. A hint is given in the Bible. He then reached into a bag he carried with him and pulled out a very old-looking Bible. He found a passage and pointed to it and said, Here, read this. Verses 22 and 23 in the 21st chapter of John. I picked up his Bible and looked at it. The print was very old. It seemed to be a King James translation, but the type was in old Roman style. I suppose this is the very first King James Bible published, I said, half joking. He glanced back somewhat serious and said, Not quite. The first edition was bulky and not practical to carry around. This is a later, but still a very old edition. Of course, I said, humoring myself. Now which verses was it you wanted me to read? 22 and 23. Keep in mind, Jesus and Peter were talking about the Apostle John, who you now remember to be me. I paused and read the verses. Peter seeing him, John, saith unto Jesus, Lord, and what shall this man do? Jesus saith unto him, If I will that he tarry till I come, what is that to thee? Follow thou me. Then went this saying abroad among the brethren, that disciple should not die. Yet Jesus said not unto him, He shall not die. But if I will that he tarry till I come, what is that to thee? I remember this scripture, I said. It's very mysterious. It seems to leave it up in the air as to whether John will die or not. I remember reading several legends that he was boiled in oil and still survived. That's not a legend. I was boiled in oil. In addition to that, I've been crucified, tortured, stabbed, hung, and shot several times. So you went through all that and you never died? I asked, amazed. Notice the careful wording of the scripture. It indicates that the will of Jesus is that I tarry until he comes again. Yet he did not say that I shall not die. I have died several times, but was revived again and healed by God. Something like the experience of Lazarus, except when I was revived, I was able to choose the age I was to be. I usually pick the early 20s. But now you look like you're around 60. Is that the age you picked this time? No, my friend. The last time I died, I was revived looking about the age of 21. That was back in 1944. Since that time, I've been aging normally. My body presently has an age of about 71 years. You look good for 71, I remarked with a smile. I've learned to take reasonable care of my body and have learned to overcome sickness. I've not been ill for about 1,500 years, and even then I was careless and poisoned by an enemy, so I was not ill for normal reasons. So how did you die in 1944? I was hung with piano wire by a wayward brother. He must have been wayward, all right. Who was this person? Adolf Hitler. Hitler, I exclaimed, after absorbing the moment. So you were in a concentration camp or something? No. He paused a moment and continued. I lived among the Germans and assisted in an attempt to overthrow the Nazis from within. My eyes widened. I remember reading about a rebellion against Hitler, led by a one-eyed, three-fingered man. That man was Klaus Schenck von Stauffenberg, who made a very brave effort to remove Hitler from power. I was there working and encouraging the little band of conspirators, but not everything a disciple does succeeds. After Stauffenberg failed in his attempt to kill Hitler, everyone who even smelled like they didn't like Hitler was killed. I was unable to escape and was one of those they rounded up and hung with piano wire because they couldn't find any regular rope. So do you experience pain when you are killed? When I'm injured, I feel what everyone else would feel, but I've learned to neutralize discomfort by detaching myself from it. So when you die, are you revived, or do you have a full memory of your past? When I am revived, I lose a lot of my memories, but then through contemplation I learn to retrieve the important ones. That is an advantage I have over others, if you want to call it that. I have a memory that goes back 2,000 years. If I were to write the story of my full life, it would take many volumes. So what have you been doing the past 50 years? It's a long story, but I will give you a skeleton outline. After I was revived, I saw the next major threat was the Soviet Union, and have spent most of my time there. I'm not allowed to be a major player, however. My mission is to work with and inspire and teach people who can change the world in a positive direction. Therefore, in Russia, I worked with those who sought freedom and democracy and encouraged them to forge ahead. The Christ told me that my work helped in the preparation for the falling of communism and the Berlin Wall. I also traveled to China and worked with the Christ to inspire the students at Tiananmen Square. But as I told you, not everything I do succeeds immediately. Even though the attempt at democracy in China failed, we planted seeds that will materialize in the next attempt. So now we are living in a time of great opportunity. The authority and tyranny that ruled communism in the Soviet Union has basically come to an end. We still have China and the third world nations, who will have nuclear weapons to worry about. But I saw a window of opportunity where I could take some time off and offer some pure spiritual teachings to the world. I have been looking forward to this for lifetimes. I just hope you are ready for what I have to give you, my friend. I've always been interested in philosophy, I said, and the spiritual side of life. If you want to teach me, I'm a sponge waiting to be filled. I'm curious about one thing, though. Why did you pick me? Christ selected you. He tuned my bells to your vibration and sent me to Boise to send you the call. The call? Yes. Before any great work is accomplished, there must be a free will response to a spiritual call of some kind. You had to make a free will response to the bells you heard and seek me out as I sought you out. The disciple must meet the teacher halfway. So this mission you have for me, is that also based on my free will? Of course. You can accept or reject it. Few disciples, however, reject a teaching mission. Instead, the problem is that most of them wind up messing it up by seeking glory for themselves instead of passing it along the chain that links us to the one God. And what is this chain? Whenever true knowledge comes to the earth, it comes through a chain of souls that are linked to the one great life. If you accept your mission, you are linked to me. I am linked to the Christ, and the Christ is linked to the entity he called the Father in the New Testament. The Father is linked to God with such oneness that he is one with God and is God in every way that the average man can conceive. Any links higher than the Eternal Father are so far beyond us that it is futile for the average person to think about them. You mean there are lives higher than Jesus or the Father of Jesus? It does not do a lot of good to go into detail about this now, for it will offend some people as the truth always does. I have been killed a number of times just because I was seen as a heretic. John continued, I will say one thing. Imagine the consciousness of just one cell in your body. Next, imagine the consciousness of all your cells put together, which consciousness is your own. The gap in consciousness between you and a cell is so great that communication on an individual basis is not practical. Yet if you have a problem with your foot, which is composed of billions of cells, you will pay attention to healing it, and in the process benefit not only the foot as a whole, but also the billions of individual cells within it. The one God governs over a large universe, And right now this sector is a sore foot. You and I are the cells that are working in conjunction with many other cells to heal the foot. That is all I will tell you about this at present. We must press on to your mission, for I'm not sure how long I have with you. Why aren't you sure? If a world crisis situation surfaces, I may be called away from you. Okay, I'll try not to distract you, I said. I was amazed at myself for being so believing, for I'm usually fairly skeptical of outlandish or unusual claims. But the reason I could not seem to question the validity of this man was that he seemed so familiar, like an old friend, and I could not deny the memories he planted in my mind. I had to ask, what is my mission? The first part of your mission is to teach the keys. What are the keys? There are 12 keys of knowledge, 12 keys of understanding, and 12 keys of eternal life. I am to teach them to you, and you will teach them to others. Are you sure you've got the right guy, I ask? I've done a little teaching, but I'm no Moses. Moses didn't think he was a great teacher either, but he did okay. Well, I would refuse to teach anything that doesn't make sense to me, I said. That is exactly the quality we're looking for in a student, he said. I'll tell you what I said. Give me some of your teachings. I'll think them over, and we'll go from there. At least you are willing to start the process, said John, but I can only give you the keys one at a time. Well, I guess it wouldn't hurt to learn a couple of them, and then if they make sense, I could continue. A logical conclusion, stated John. So when do we start, I asked. How about now, said John. Right now? I'm afraid I'm not prepared. I don't even have anything with me to write on. This is not your standard method of teaching, he said. You do not need any paper. What do I need then? You need to use your understanding as you have never done before. I was silent for a long 15 seconds in anticipation. Chapter 5. Hints and the First Key. I gathered my forces and inquired, so how do we go about doing this? If I were to just tell you the keys, your understanding of them would be quite limited, and you would not appreciate the depth of knowledge that lies behind them, he said. Instead, we will use what is called the intuitive principle. I will give you pieces of information or hints, and you will contemplate where they are leading you, and give me your intuitive feedback. Then I will give you more hints until you come to an understanding of the principle. Sometimes that understanding comes gradually, and other times it comes instantly in a flash of light. So are you going to give me a hint now, I ask? Yes. Your first hint is the question, who or what are you? Or if you put it in the first person, you ask, who or what am I? Each time you are given a hint, you are allowed to ask enough questions to get the direction of the hint settled in your mind, so your intuition can foment. Do you have anything you want to ask? I might as well take a stab at the answer, I said. It seems easy enough. How about I am a human being? That is the definition of your physical presence, he said, but the term human being is just a vibrating term that tells you nothing of what you are. Think again. Who or what are you? Obviously, John was not going to let me off easy here, so I reflected a moment and replied, If I recall correctly, the Scripture tells us that we're supposed to be sons of God. Is that what we are? It is true you are a human being, he said. You're also a son of God, as the Scriptures teach. But just saying you are a human or a son of God, godlike or angelic, means little. It's just an expression of words with little meaning to most. Let me ask you again. Who or what are you? Really? This sounded easy at first, but I was beginning to get the idea that it may be harder than I thought. I thought a moment of every teaching I could think of about who I was, and then responded. Some say, I am spirit or soul. Is that who I am? And what is spirit or soul? Said John. Well, I guess it's me without my body, perhaps that which continues after death, I said. If I were to tell you that you are a spirit, does that tell you anything about who or what you are? Well, yes, I guess so. What does it tell you? It tells me that I'm, some type of spirit essence. Didn't you learn from basic English that you're not supposed to define a word with a word that you are defining? You do not define red by saying it is red. You do not define spirit by saying it is spirit. Now let me repeat. If I say you are spirit, what does it tell you? I was about to define spirit by using the word spirit again, but caught myself and thought a moment, I guess if I am spirit, then I am not physical. John then reached toward me and grabbed my wrist. But I can feel your physical self. Are you really spirit? Well, I guess I'm a physical being with a spirit, I ventured. Let me explain something that you must remember throughout this course. I will always speak to you precisely. I did not say that you have a spirit, but I ask you what it would mean if you were spirit. I guess it would mean that I'm not physical, I said. Progress at last, said John. But if you're not physical, then what is left? I thought a moment. Spirit, I suppose. John sighed. Again, what is spirit? Oh, I'm not exactly sure. Perhaps life, essence, vibration. It is what we are when we're not physical. But if you are spirit, it is also what you are when you are physical. If you are spirit, then you are always spirit. Do you think you alter between being spirit and not being spirit? No, I guess not, I said. You now have food for thought. Think about this question for next week. We will then meet in 7 days and review your thoughts and give you more direction. Please repeat the question for me again. What is spirit? I said. No, my friend. That followed the question. If you are to get the correct answer, you must contemplate the correct question. What is the question? Well, I guess it's who am I, then? Not quite. Think again. What is the question? Remember what I said about exact wording. Was it, what am I? Think again, he said. I thought back to the beginning. Was it who or what am I? That is correct, my friend. Now contemplate the exact wording and the direction of our conversation during this next week. Make notes of what comes to your mind, no matter how out of place or ridiculous the thoughts may seem. Also keep this thought in mind as we progress. Sometimes the hints will help you discover the direction you are not supposed to go, or wrong answers. So eventually the only way left is truth. Interesting, I nodded in appreciation. Now let me ask again, if I were to tell you that you are spirit, does that tell you anything about who or what you are? I guess in reality it doesn't tell me a whole lot, I said. You are correct. Even if the statement is true, it means very little to you or anyone else in your present state of understanding. When and if you get the first principle, you'll at least have some understanding along with it. Fascinating. I felt like Spock on Star Trek observing an advanced alien race. Time is about up, he said. I should be on my way. John, I have one more question, I ventured. Yes. Can I share what I have learned with my wife? If you are successful, you will share your knowledge with the world. Because the destiny of male and female is to become one, you should share all things with your trusted wife. But do not tell anyone else of your experience until the time is right, or you will be cut off from further teachings. Here, let me get the tab. It seems strange to have John the Apostle buy me coffee. I would have thought someone of your status would just materialize what you need. How little you realize the correct use of power, my friend. When in the world of man interacting with man, I must be as a man just as you are. You will learn more about power later. He shook my hand. Goodbye for now. Where and when will I see you again? I asked. I'm working as a bell ringer 7 days a week at Albertson's supermarket. I am easy to find. Come back in 7 days, next Thursday, and we will continue class. Okay, sure, I said as I watched him pay for coffee and walk out the door. I half expected to blink my eyes and watch him disappear as he walked down the sidewalk. But he did not. He just looked like a normal older person strolling down the walk until he was out of sight. Chapter 6. The Beginning of Knowledge. After taking a few minutes to explain why I was late getting home, I told Elizabeth the details of my conversations with John. I don't know, she said. It sounds pretty hard to believe. I think sometimes you are a little too eager to believe some of the weird stuff you get into. I mean, look at it from my point of view. One moment this man was just a bell ringer for the Salvation Army, and the next minute he has you believing he's Apostle John from the time of Christ. You told me not to tell anyone about this. You don't have to worry about that. I'm afraid if I did, they would put you away. Then I'd have nobody to take care of me during my last few months on this earth. I know it sounds crazy, I said, shaking my head. And there's no way he could have convinced me in so short a time. But when he put his hand next to mine and looked at me like he and I were one person, for an instant I saw his thoughts and the purity and his memories from the days of Jesus. There was something so real about it that it is impossible to describe. After the thought transfer, I am more positive that he is Apostle John than I am sure of being here in this house at this moment. It sounds crazy, but you've got to trust me on this. I trust you more than anyone I know, but sometimes you make mistakes and your judgment is not always perfect. I trust your sincerity 100%, but you're not infallible, she said. But you know I've never lied to you. I'm telling you, John put his thoughts and some of his memories in my mind as clear as day. But I wasn't there, she said. Maybe he's some master hypnotist of some kind, with perhaps an evil design. I can't blame you for doubting, I said. I probably would too if you came home telling me a story like this. I'm not saying your story about John is not true, she said. I'm just not convinced. I'll tell you what would convince me, though. What's that? Do you remember reading in the New Testament that Jesus gave his disciples the same power to do miracles that he did? If I remember right, they did some amazing healings like Jesus did. You're right, I said. I even have some of John's memories planted in me of some of the great miracles that are not even in the Bible. I have the recollection of John walking on water, and another time of putting out a great fire by his word and saving many lives. Then again, he brought back a friend from the dead, even as Jesus did with Lazarus. Elizabeth's eyes brightened. So he should have no problem healing me then, should he? I know he could. He spoke about the correct use of power, though, as if I did not understand it. Maybe healing you is something he's not allowed to do for some reason. During World War II, he was strung up with piano wire and unable to save himself. But on other occasions, he was able to use the power of God to help, she said. Yes, that's true. I just don't want to get our hopes up here, but you're right. We may just have the greatest miracle man walking the earth right here in our midst. He may not only hold the keys of knowledge, but he may hold the keys to your being made whole again. There's only one way to find out, she said. You've got to ask him. If he heals me, then I'll know for sure that he is the apostle. Well, I don't think I'd be struck down for asking, I said. It's worth a try, but he told me to come back in a week and continue the lesson. Did he tell you couldn't talk to him for a week, she said. No. Since the man drank coffee at Denny's, he probably also eats. Why don't you go see him tomorrow and invite him over for dinner? We could ask him then. Well, it's worth a try, I said. That night I was lucky if I got 2 hours sleep. I'd never had such a restless anticipation. The next morning I took a little shopping trip. Sure enough, there he was, ringing his bell near the entrance to Albertsons. As I approached, our eyes met. He smiled a brief fatherly smile at me. I had to come to the store to get a couple things, I said. It wasn't really a lie. There were a couple things I needed, I thought to myself. John's countenance became more serious. I suppose you have to do all the shopping since your wife is unable to. How did you know about my wife? I asked. Not only did I give you some of my memories, but I caught a glimpse at some of yours. You love your wife very much, don't you? Yes, very much. I was in your situation almost 2,000 years ago. My wife became deathly ill, and I had to watch her waste away. There was nothing I could do. It still bothers me, even after all this time. You mean you performed all those miracles and you couldn't heal your own wife? I felt a sinking feeling that he may not be able to help Elizabeth. Yes, through me God healed hundreds of people I didn't even know, but the woman I loved was beyond my power. It sounds almost like God is cruel, I said bitterly. Not really, John said with understanding and empathy. There is always love if we see the big picture. All pain and all illness exist to either guide us or teach us. If we do not learn the lesson from the disease, then the disease will either continue or change form until we die. Even though my wife was a great lady, she was also stubborn. She was unable to accept the change necessary to be healed. In some ways, I think I suffered more than she did. I know the feeling, I said softly. Many of the people that Jesus and the disciples healed got their illnesses back, he said, because they did not make the necessary corrections in their lives. Some of these people were turned into enemies and sought out our lives. Others were permanently healed and were faithful to the end. John paused and looked at me with great earnestness. You've come to ask me to heal your wife, haven't you? I was amazed by his perception, but then replied, Yes. Is it possible? She's supposed to be incurable. Remember what the Master said. All things are possible. Will you do it then, I asked? I will let you know what I can do after I meet her. I sense she wants to meet me, to know that I am for real. She asked me to invite you over for dinner, I said. How about tonight? Can you pick me up here about 6? I'll be here, I said. John was waiting for me at 6. After getting in the car, I said, You know I have a million questions for you. That's a good sign, he said. The asking of questions is the beginning of knowledge. You'd be surprised how many people would have no questions, even if God himself were to appear to them. You're kidding. If a source of knowledge like you is available, then you would think the average guy would be spilling over asking all kinds of things. Many people are afraid of the truth, even among those who claim to be seekers and teachers. When you come face to face with undeniable truth, you must either conform to it or live your life as a hypocrite. Because people resist change, they resist truth. That is why few people have more than 2 or 3 questions they would ask, even if they knew for sure they could get correct answers. I must not be average. I have hundreds of questions, I said. That's the way it is. You are either of truth, or you do not want to know more than your comfort zone will allow, or you are open to truth and change, and your range of inquiry is infinite. Since it is good to have questions, will you answer them? You can ask anything you want, he said. I will either answer your questions or I will not. It is that simple. Some things you are meant to discover on your own. Others are hidden from you for a purpose. Certain other mysteries you are meant to discover at a certain time and in a certain place. Let's start with this. You eat, don't you, since you're coming to dinner? Yes, John laughed. I live each rejuvenated life as an ordinary mortal. I am as dependent on food as you are. Are you vegetarian, or do you live on a special diet, I asked. In ideal circumstances, I would be a vegetarian, but right now I try to eat a common-sense diet. I do what is necessary to keep my vehicle strong and vital. Your vehicle? Yes, I was referring to my body. Oh, well, since the Bible says you were a fisherman, I thought we would serve you salmon. Does that sound okay? Salmon is good, he smiled. As we walked in the house, Elizabeth was waiting in her wheelchair in the dining room. So this must be the mystery man, she said. She had a friendly yet skeptical look in her eye. John met her hand with a shake and said, And you are Elizabeth, a woman of grace, strength, and beauty. Do I look familiar to you? Elizabeth looked puzzled. I'm not sure. Why? As we talk, it will seem to you that you know me. He looked toward the kitchen. Is there anything I can do to help with the meal? Can you make a salad, I asked. My specialty, he said proudly. Good, I'll put you to work while I sizzle the salmon steaks. Chapter 7. Questions. As John and I were preparing dinner, Elizabeth was sitting in her wheelchair at the dining room table. I sensed that she was uncomfortable with the idea that we were having company and that she was unable to do anything to help. She was getting to the point that if she got any worse, she would have to have someone come stay with her all the time. She was still insisting that I go out and work my normal schedule and that she could take care of herself, but I was beginning to feel uneasy about her. I looked her direction. Sweetie, do you have any questions you want to ask John? You guys go ahead and finish putting the meal on, and I'll let John have it then, she said. I looked at John Do you drink wine? A little now and then, he said. How about some Gewürztraminer? It's our favorite for special occasions, I said. You have good taste. I was a little nervous about offering it to you. After all, your contemporary, John the Baptist, was supposed to eat nothing but locusts and honey. But when he was in prison, he ate whatever they gave him, he said. Every food, every element in the universe is good and beneficial if taken in the right portions, in the right combinations, and bad when the limit is crossed. Quinine is a good example. It has been added in minute amounts to drinks for many years, but deadly if any substantial amount were taken. Research now shows that moderate amounts of alcohol have a beneficial effect on the heart. Even cigarettes, if taken in small doses, like just 2 or 3 a week, could have a beneficial stimulation to the system for some. The trouble with them is that very few people have the self-control to limit their intake on these and other habit-forming substances. How about pot, I said. How is that beneficial? Well, pot, as you call it, is a medicine and should be administered by a knowledgeable healer, he said. It should not be used on a regular basis without the advice of a physician or spiritual teacher. Overuse can have the negative effect of weakening the power of the will and delaying the correct use of the energy centers in the head. Extreme overuse can cause physical and other problems. Interesting, I said. John and I took the food to the table. Looks like we're about ready to dine, I said. Elizabeth tells me that I make the best salmon steaks there are. Looks as good as anything the French can dream up, John said. And salmon is very good for Elizabeth's diet. Let me propose a toast, I said, as I raised my glass. May the truth always prevail. Great toast, John replied, smiling. That is not the first time I have heard you propose it, nor will it be the last. He saw a question mark in my eyes. Don't ask me to explain that remark yet, he said. May the truth always prevail. John and I drank deeply. I always filled Elizabeth's wine glass about half full so she could drink with her shaking hands. Still, she spilled a couple drops. Excuse me, she said, wiping herself with a napkin. No problem, said John. Didn't you promise to interrogate me? Yes, I do have some questions, she said. This may be somewhat of a special occasion, John interrupted. This is the first time I have opened myself up to questions, with knowledge of my identity on the table for several hundred years. Elizabeth set her fork down and wiped her mouth. So you really think you are John the Beloved? Tell me in your own words who you are. This is such a fantastic claim, I want to hear it from your own mouth. John leaned forward and looked at Elizabeth thoughtfully. The Beloved was a term originated by one of my students, and for some reason it stuck, and I was called the disciple that Jesus loved in the final edition of the Gospel of John. I did not feel at the time that I deserved such a title. In many ways back then I was somewhat immature and fell short as a disciple of the Master. All of us betrayed him in some degree. Someday I will tell you why Jesus chose me to wander the earth until he comes again. In a way it has been a great honor, and has had many rewards, yet in another way it has been very difficult. What do you mean you all betrayed him in some degree? Asked Elizabeth. I thought you were all holy men. Jesus was the only holy man among us, and even that was not obvious until one looked below the surface. The disciples were much more ordinary than any of the churches would ever want you to believe. The 12 apostles were not much more out of the ordinary than a group of salesmen at a convention. The only thing we had in common was the desire to learn the deeper mysteries. We were also attracted by the power that Jesus had and wanted him to share it with us, but our motives were not entirely pure. At one point, we let jealousy overcome us and accused Jesus of being a glory seeker. We told him that he needed to let us do and take credit for some of the miracles so he would be forced to stay humble. Now I see on reflection that it was we who needed to be humbled. He was just doing the job he came to do, and it attracted attention. At the time, we felt like we deserved attention just as much as Jesus did, and we wanted our share. Well, if you are the Apostle John, and this is true, why are you telling us? Asked Elizabeth. I would think you would want to keep anything negative about your history under your hat. That was our basic attitude when we related the story of the gospel to students that was finally written down in permanent form. We were somewhat defensive when the story of how we deserted Jesus on the night of his arrest kept surfacing. None of the 11 remaining apostles wanted that to go on a permanent record, but the truth was out there, and shortly after the resurrection there was no suppressing it. Peter suffered the most, however, because Jesus actually predicted he would deny him 3 times before the cock crowed. Many ignorant people thought he did not deserve to be a leader because of this act, and some who were jealous of his position even crowed like a rooster when he walked by to remind him of his mistake. Peter suffered great pain because of his error, yet he also performed the greatest miracles among us. John continued, "To answer your question, why do I reveal my past weaknesses? For 2 reasons. Joseph will write about our conversations, and in this round I must reveal the truth about the humanity of the little group who followed the Master. In the past we tried to portray ourselves as greater than we were. Secondly, I want you to realize that I'm just a human being like yourselves. I have many answers, but not all the answers. I have some power available, but not all power. I would rather give you more than you expect than less." I asked John if he wanted more salmon, and he happily accepted. My interest in John increased by the minute. "So how would you rate yourself now?" Elizabeth asked. "Have you made some progress?" "I appreciate that question. Yes, I've made a lot of progress. Back in those days I was like a kid in a candy store. Now I'm more like the father who had too much candy as a kid, deciding how much candy my own child should have. My perspective and judgment is much improved. Even so, I cannot just blurt out the few mysteries of the universe that I know. Higher knowledge cannot just be poured into you like placing data in a computer. To be fully understood, it must be verified through a person's own soul." "And what is the difference between lower and higher knowledge?" Elizabeth asked. "Lower knowledge deals with facts and can be used as soon as it's memorized," said John, "like how to spell certain words or the multiplication tables. 7 times 7 is 49. As soon as anyone memorizes this, he can use it in the practical world. Higher knowledge deals with principles and requires a certain attuning with the spiritual self to be able to apply it. For instance, anyone can learn how to write down musical notes, but to compose a beautiful and original melody requires an attuning with music itself. Anyone can memorize a scale of notes, but only the person who is in tune with music can come close to understanding the principle behind music and write original scores. So the first key, which is who or what am I, cannot just be told to us," Elizabeth concluded. "That is correct. You must tune into it and understand the meaning. My job is to merely guide you in the right direction. I'm like the person coaching the songwriter. I could say to such a person, that doesn't even sound like music. Try again. Or that sounds beautiful and stirs my soul. Keep on writing. I will know within myself when you have reached the required level of understanding." "Interesting," said Elizabeth. I was just sitting back, relaxing and enjoying Elizabeth giving John an interrogation. She continued, "Now I have some real questions for you." "Ask on," John replied, obviously pleased with Elizabeth's curiosity. Elizabeth reached into the pocket of her skirt and pulled out a list. "Here they are. Number 1, what is the meaning of life? 2, where did we come from? Why are we here and where are we going? 3, how much of the Bible is really true? 4, is there a true church, and if there is, which one is it? 5, is there reincarnation? 6, is Christ really coming again? If so, when? 7, when did the universe begin, and when will it end? Who or what is God, and why is he not doing something constructive on the earth today? Looks to me like he doesn't care much about starving children, for instance. 9, does this earth have any future awaiting it, or is there going to be some dark apocalypse where life as we know it will cease to exist? 10, why does God allow suffering, disease, and untimely death? What father would let his children suffer as some of us have to? If God is really a loving God, it just doesn't make sense. Take me, for instance. I know I'm not perfect, but there are a lot of rapists and murderers out there who are in much better physical shape than I am. Why am I punished and not them?" John smiled. "That's an impressive list of questions. Did you think them up yourself?" "My husband and I thought them up last night when we were sort of brainstorming." For several reasons, I will only give you so much at a time, he said. I will take one question from you tonight. Pick the one that means most to you. I think you know which one that is, Elizabeth said evenly. That could be, John said. Nevertheless, you must clearly state your question. Why is that? She protested. There's a principle governing the transmission of higher principles. Have you heard the statement by Jesus in the Bible where he says, "Ask and you shall receive"? I believe so, she said. If you want to know any mystery, you must ask and know what you're asking. The one being asked must know what is being asked, and the one who is asking must be willing to receive if the answer is given. And if I reject the answer? Then it will be as if the question were never asked, John replied. I'm not sure if you are really John the Beloved, she said, but at least you are unusual. How do I know if I am ready for the answer? When you are ready to consider anything, no matter how crazy it sounds, said John. So the answer to number 10 could be that God is really a spoiled cosmic brat who is torturing us like a kid who sticks pins in bees and pulls wings off flies? You never know, said John wryly. Okay, I will not guarantee I'm ready, but here's the question. It's number 10. Articulate the question, said John. Okay, I'll repeat it. Elizabeth shifted in her wheelchair. Why does God allow suffering, disease, and untimely death? Why do some innocent children die? Why do some of us suffer with painful disease, and others who deserve to suffer seem to be vibrant and healthy? I'll answer at least part of your question, said John, and in particular, you want to know why you suffer with such a dread disease when you've been basically a good person and do not deserve such pain. You wonder why your life will seemingly be cut short, while other people can gracefully grow old with their partners. Is that what you want to know? Basically, yes, she said. I will give you a partial answer now, and more later when you have additional pieces to the puzzle. Can you accept this? He asked. I suppose so. Go ahead, show me what you've got, she said. I smiled at Elizabeth's spunkiness and looked at John with great anticipation for the answer. Chapter 8. The Answer. John took a breath, leaned back in his chair, and said, By the way, that's about the best salmon I've had in 1,000 years. Good wine, too. Reminds me of some good German ones back in the 30s. I appreciate your hospitality. Thanks, that means a lot coming from you, I beamed. Now on to the question, said John. The question Elizabeth asks is not usually of great concern for the person who is healthy, active, and gliding along in life. But sooner or later, every soul in his or her progress reaches some type of life crisis or problem and looks to the skies at some invisible being and demands, Why me, God? Or it may be, Why my wife? Or why my child? Or why my parents? He wants to know why this suffering seems to single him out and not others who seem to richly deserve it. He hears that God is love, but if he is loving, then why would he allow this? John paused for a moment and then continued. If and when you finish the 36 principles, the answer to this will be fairly clear in your mind. For instance, when you understand who and what God is, it will be a great help, but for now we will stick to the basics. There are great truths hidden in some of the maxims of this world, he said. For instance, you've heard the phrase, no pain, no gain? We both nodded. This statement is as good as Scripture. Do you think there has ever been an Olympic champion who got where he was without a great deal of pain? How about a successful businessman, an inventor, a great actor? They've all had to go through painful experiences or make painful sacrifices, but in the end, the pain produced gain. Now, an interesting point here is that these successful individuals volunteered for the pain. Because they had faith, the pain would produce gain. The runner painfully pushes his body because he believes it will result in a stronger body and eventually the joy of accomplishment and victory. Let us imagine the various parts of your body have their own life and consciousness. See your lungs as one entity, your heart as another, your muscles as still another, and your brain as a fourth entity. You are the whole person and you are in charge of the general decision-making as to what is good for the whole. Let us say that the brain wants to read a book, the muscles want to sleep because they are tired, the The lungs want some fresh air, and the heart wants some romance. The problem is that they cannot do all these things. They can only do one of them. Who gets to decide? If the brain decides all the time, the whole body will spend all of its time reading and will never get fresh air for the lungs. If the heart forces the body to spend all the free time and romance, then the brain will be bored to death. It is fortunate that decision-making is turned over to you, the whole person running the body. You make the decisions for the body by taking the whole into consideration. Your decisions may not be perfect, but they are much better for the whole than if the power were turned over to the part. So are you saying that I'm a part of a greater whole, and that this greater whole is making me suffer for some greater benefit of something greater than myself? Elizabeth asked. That is part of the answer, John nodded. Now to visualize more clearly, let us suppose that you decide you are going to be a champion long-distance runner. When you start your training, no one of these 4 lives I mentioned will be happy. During the running practice, the brain will have too much blood rushing through it to even be able to think. The lungs will feel like they are on fire and ready to explode. The muscles will ache and feel as if they cannot go on. And the heart will pump like crazy, thinking it is being tortured. All these little lives are shouting out the question, why is this happening to us? What is the purpose of it all? Then comes a time months later that the body is in perfect tune and ready for the competition. How do these little lives feel about being pushed now? The brain notices that it gets more oxygen and thinks and functions much better. The lungs are happy that they have to breathe about half the frequency as they used to, and breathing is much easier. The muscles are aware that the weight of the body seems much lighter, and they no longer need much rest. Finally, the heart, like the lungs, seems to be able to rest much more and does not have to beat as often or with as much effort as it used to. In the end, they all think the same thought. We've been through a lot of pain, and we didn't like it at the time, but now life seems much easier, fuller, and more rewarding. Now, said John, moving his chair closer to the table, we'll move this analogy closer to home. It may seem to us that we are the highest lives in the universe, and that what we do only affects ourselves. But it does not. Each of us has invisible links to family, friends, city, state, and every other life on this planet and even the universe. These are all various higher bodies in which we interact and produce effect. We are linked up with these other lives through the Holy Spirit, who is the final judge as to circumstances that will be brought into play which will benefit the whole. Elizabeth wheeled back from the table. So you telling me that the Spirit of God decided to make me ill to the benefit of the whole in some way? She asked this angrily. Well, I don't think my illness is benefiting anyone or anything. In fact, it's keeping me from doing many good things I've always wanted to do. She looked ready to leave the room. It may seem that way, John replied softly and patiently. But for greater understanding, you must realize that there are 2 of you who are undergoing a painful experience here. In some ways, your husband suffers more pain than you do. When a loved one is suffering through what appears to be no fault of his own, and you can do nothing about it, that helplessness is very painful. Believe me, I know. I was in Joseph's situation long ago. After a long pause, Elizabeth sighed, her eyes slightly tearful. You're probably right. He has to work much harder than he used to be able to take care of everything. Now I even have him doing housework. Believe me, that is proof he loves me. Then I'll probably bring him additional pain by complaining too much. You don't complain as much when you are ill as others do when they are well, I assured her. Actually, said John, the analogy so far applies more to Joseph than it does to you. Like the story of the 4 little lives, Joseph, through no fault of his own, found himself married to a person with an incurable disease. He is like all of us to some degree or another. We find ourselves in situations that we had seemingly little, if any, power in creating. And once there, we just have to deal with it the best we can. Like the brain, he had to forego pleasant studies. Like the lungs, he had to work harder to supply oxygen or money to keep everything running smooth. Like the muscles, he had to be more active and take on a larger load. Like the heart, he had to put romance on the back burner and concentrate on just keeping your relationship alive by pumping harder to keep the life-giving energy circulating between the both of you. Later, just like the 4 little lives, Joseph will find that he has more freedom, power, and strength than he ever had before. That's very interesting, said Elizabeth, shaking her head. But I'm still in the dark as to why I have to suffer this disease. Don't tell me it's just so my husband can have a growing experience." "Not at all," John replied. "However, that may be part of the reason the Spirit sent a charge of energy that caused Joseph to fall in love with you and marry you. But the benefits of your disease for Joseph are merely side benefits that we all pick up along the road of life if we handle our situations correctly as they come up." "You've gone all around my question, but haven't answered me yet. Why don't you just blurt it out and tell me?" Elizabeth pleaded, her voice shaking. John looked into Elizabeth's eyes and replied softly and slowly, "Whenever you meet a true spiritual teacher worth his salt, he will rarely answer you outright. Instead, he circles around the core thought, so when the answer is finally manifested, it will be understood. Now that is what I'm about to do. Why do bad things such as your illness happen to good people? As I said before, you are part of a greater whole that is joined together by the Holy Spirit. Each person in an individual life has one major lesson he is supposed to learn, one ability or talent he is developing, and one quality he is supposed to enhance. This triangle of learning is never easy and is always a struggle. For instance, if a certain person was born with the natural ability to play the piano, the lesson would generally not be directly connected with it, because internally this is something he has already mastered. Instead, the piano may be a distraction to tempt him away from his real lesson, which may be in the opposite direction, such as heavy construction. If he is driven by his soul to become a famous musician, the lesson could be connected with fame and not the talent itself." Elizabeth interrupted. "From the time I was young, I had a gift for drawing. I never took any classes, but I could draw most anything in moments, and it would look great. Just as I was thinking of developing this talent more fully, I got this disease. Now my hands shake too much to be able to draw." "This ability that you naturally had was your temptress, to lead you astray from your true calling to improve yourself and to be more useful to the whole, thus becoming holy, a holy person," said John. "So what am I supposed to learn?" Elizabeth asked. "As I said, the thing you're supposed to learn is something that you are usually not talented in and naturally resist to some degree. When the degree of resistance becomes too great and you're not hearing or seeing the messages that the Spirit is sending you, then the message must be sent more strongly. If it is resisted again, you may be sent a life-threatening illness, such as yours, which forces you to look upward and to shout out, 'Why me, God?'" "I've done that before," said Elizabeth. "So what am I resisting?" "Think," John suggested. "Think of situations you may not like that seem to keep repeating themselves, forcing you to do or work at something you don't particularly want to do." "I know what mine is," I spoke up. "I've always enjoyed doing creative things, especially writing of all types, and I've always been forced into situations where I have no time for creative endeavors, and always wind up doing something in sales or business to make the money I need. I used to hate sales and business, but now I'm becoming good at it. I now appreciate business and sales talent as much or more than I do artistic talent." "And that is why you are healthy," said John. "You eventually gave in to the forces pushing you toward your lesson and are making progress. As long as you are making progress in your lesson, your soul does not have to send you great pain to move you ahead." "So what is Elizabeth resisting?" I asked again. "She must examine the experiences of her life. Look within, touch bases with the still small voice, find out what she has avoided doing, and then do it." "How will I know when I found it?" she asked. "It will feel very right and good when you finally yield to it," he said. "So what is the lesson of her disease?" I asked. "Every disease is a teacher," said John. "You must look at the disease, see where it is located, and the effect it is having in order to discern its lesson. For instance, heart disease must be trying to teach us something connected with the heart. The heart is the seat of spiritual love. If it is time for you to learn the value and expression of such love, which is an octave higher than passionate love or possessive love, and you resist, then the heart becomes weak, as a message to you that your expression of love is weaker than it should be." "But I've had some friends with heart problems, and they seem like pretty nice people," Elizabeth exclaimed. "On the other hand, I've known some cruel people who seem to not know what love is at all, yet have healthy hearts. How do you explain that?" "The cruel people you mention are not yet ready to learn about spiritual love, so their souls do not even make an attempt to teach them by bringing them pain in that direction. Maybe the cruel person needs to start with a simple lesson. Perhaps he's just supposed to learn the value of giving and receiving affection. Maybe he is suffering through tremendous pain and rejection because he is not getting any affection from anyone. Maybe this rejection just about drives him crazy until he finally yields and gives in to it. For him that is a big step, but for us we wonder why anyone would have a problem with it. So what's the lesson of cancer, I asked, becoming even more interested. Ah, cancer, said John. Many great souls have died of this. One of the most painful of all teachers. All disease falls into two categories. First is congestion. This is caused by holding in too much, such as in suppression or denial. The second is inflammation. This is caused by not holding in enough and releasing more energy than you take in. Cancer is caused by congestion. The person holds in or suppresses energy or feelings that need to be released. And this holding in produces growth, which is symbolic of the unreleased desire or feeling. Let us suppose that you see yourself as a nice person, and you find yourself in contact with a rough individual who hurts your feelings. You have three choices. First, you can hurt his feelings right back. Second, you can release your hurt by telling that person how he made you feel. Or third, you can be a nice person and avoid conflict by pretending that everything is okay. This third alternative that many take is by far the worst choice. First, it encourages a rude person to continue in his behavior, and second, it is a deception that the Spirit of Truth will not allow to forever remain in an evolving soul. People think that the most frequent lie is the check is in the mail. But in reality, it is communication which says, I am fine, you did not hurt me. This is the biggest lie. Lesser souls are allowed to lie and get away with it. Like children, they get away with certain things because of their lack of understanding. But when a person reaches a certain stage in progression, this greatest lie is no longer tolerated and the lesson must be learned. Cancer is caused by many types of suppression. Hurt feelings, as I said, is a big one. Denial of feeling is another. Lack of sexual fulfillment due to lack of communication, miscommunication, or guilt is another. All involve deception of some type. You're circling around the answer again, said Elizabeth. I can see that this method of teaching does have the effect of stimulating interest. Now I'm more curious than ever about what you will say about my illness. That is as it should be, John smiled. Every disease has both physical and spiritual ingredients affecting the problem. For instance, people think that contact with germs produce certain illnesses. Yet two people can inhale the same germs, and one can get sick and the other will not be affected. Perhaps the one who did not become ill was in better physical shape, but more often than not he was more in harmony with his soul in that area where the disease has a lesson to teach. Multiple sclerosis was very rare before 100 years ago, and even today rarely occurs in less civilized societies. Part of the reason for this is our over-processed and depleted foods. Another is the chemicals and poisons that civilization is currently exposed to. You've heard the theory that mercury fillings can bring on MS, and there's a grain of truth in this, but Joseph has more mercury in his mouth than you have, yet is unaffected. The difference lies in the spiritual reason. The seed of the problem lies in the brain and the nervous system. In MS, there is a loss of a fatty protective layer between the brain and the nerves, causing a malfunction or loss of communication between the brain and the all-important nervous system. Spiritually, our nervous system needs a certain amount of protection from our thoughts, brain activity, and our fears, which our brains and feelings tend to amplify. MS is basically caused by failure to correctly direct thoughts and fears into the right place. The patient must realize that unchecked fears and thoughts can run rampant and destroy the protective layer over the nerves. When unchecked thoughts and fears interact directly on the nervous system, a physical correspondence can take place, and the person can become ill. So did I escape getting MS because I somehow did not let my thoughts and fears affect my nervous system, I ask? You create the protection you need by shifting your attention from destructive thoughts and fears. This shifting of attention gives your nervous system its needed rest. On the other hand, Elizabeth suppresses unwanted thoughts and fears. This gives her the appearance of resting the nerves, but its effect is the opposite. Instead, she has another deception producing a destructive effect. By deceiving herself and pretending certain thoughts and fears do not exist, a dangerous situation is created, and we have another disease of congestion as a result. So what thoughts and fears do I pretend do not exist? Asked Elizabeth, leaning forward. Unfortunately, it would not be right for me to fully explain that to you at this time. I can teach you around the principle, but you must do a certain amount of soul-searching yourself, or you will be denied a great growing experience. He paused a moment and said, "Here, let me touch your forehead." John reached across the table and touched her forehead with the fingertips of his right hand. "Let the energy flow for a moment," he said, closing his eyes. He took a long, slow breath and exhaled softly and evenly. We were silent for a short time. "There," said John, "you will feel stronger for a few days. I do this to give you faith that you can be healed." "I do feel stronger," Elizabeth said, obviously surprised. She looked at John with great emotion in her eyes. "If you are really John the Beloved, can you just heal me like people were healed by Jesus?" John paused and thought of his past. Many healings were permitted at that time because it was extremely important as a witness to the Son of God. The good that resulted outweighed the bad. But there were some problems for those who were healed who were not ready. It is also very important that you be healed so you can help Joseph with the work he has to do. But the problem is that you will need the benefits of the knowledge and ability gained from the healing to fulfill your own mission correctly. "Does this mean that I can be healed?" she asked eagerly. "Definitely. But both you and your husband must do your part. You are in a race against time. You must achieve healing while your brain-body interactions are still intact, or it could be too late. If you and Joseph can solve the first 3 keys of knowledge before this happens, you will be healed. On the other hand, you may be healed early through correct action, thought, and faith." "Doesn't telling her something like that increase fears and unwanted thoughts?" I asked. "Won't such stress make things worse?" "If handled correctly, it will force her to deal with her thoughts and fears, so she will learn to put them in the right place," John answered, standing up to leave. "This is as far as we can go now. It has been a pleasure." As I was opening the door for John to leave, I asked, "How did you know I have more Mercury fillings than Elizabeth?" "You will find out at the right time," he smiled. "Let me drive you home," I offered. "That's all right. It's a nice night for a walk," he said. "But it must be 5 miles to wherever you live." "It doesn't matter. Walking and arranging your thoughts is a very healthy thing." As he walked into the night, he reminded me of Cain in the Kung Fu series. This time I thought he did disappear in the distance, but I wasn't sure. After all, it was fairly dark.